Um, I've worked in SolarWinds for nearly 15 years across a variety of different roles and different focuses. And that's kind of partly what I wanted to come and talk to you about today. So, over the years and across the role changes, I've learned an awful lot about overcoming self doubt and beating back imposter syndrome. So, I wanted to open up and talk about it and what I've learned in case it helps anybody here. Second here, lost my mouse. Here we go. Right. So my career path so far has been anything but direct. It has been multiple times in my career that I've had this kind of like the obvious move was to move up the ladder, but instead I decided to sidestep and either take over an entirely different team or an area instead. Sometimes it was moving into areas that I knew very little about, like moving from the world of tech support, where I'd been just training in new hires, into setting up an entire customer and partner training program, and dealing with that team. It was a huge learning curve for me. And then when I moved across to quality of service, it was building out a team of professionals that knew far more about their area than I did. And we had a very loose remit of we need to improve the quality of our interactions with customers. Go. So I walked hand in hand with imposter syndrome a few times with those changes. And it tends to hit when you least expect it. But even though I got used to talking myself back out of it, I honestly found it far more often after moving into a data role. So let's talk about what imposter syndrome is first. It was first coined in the 80s as the imposter, sorry, in the 70s as the imposter phenomenon. And it was used as a way to describe high achieving women in a male dominated senior business world. Since then, it's become it's now called imposter syndrome, and it's come to mean that feeling that you're not good enough to be in a particular role, or that you find it hard to acknowledge your competence in a role, or that you're just this feeling that you're waiting to be found out. It's also considered the opposite of the Dunning-Kruger effect, and this is also known as an overconfidence bias, or simply put, you don't know what you don't know. The opposite of this being imposter phenomenon is like an underconfidence because you do know what you don't know, and that worries you even if you're amazing at the bits that you do know. Um, and as we're all data people here, let me add in one additional data point. There was a 2020 study that found that up to 82% of people have encountered imposter syndrome. And according to the International Journal of Behavioral Science, an estimated 70% of people will experience it at least once in their lives. So that brings me back to why I wanted to talk about it. The hardest thing about it is that feeling of waiting to be found out, because instead of asking others and learning more from them, it kind of forces you to turn inwards to figure things out on your own, or it makes you underestimate how much you know, and makes you feel that you have nothing to share with the group. And that way, no one wins. Um, I honestly thought a lot about why I was affected by this far more in a data role than in other roles. And if anyone has thoughts on this as well, like feel free to drop them in the chat. It's interesting to see kind of people's data points or people's viewpoints on this. Um, for me, I think it's because this industry is so rapidly evolving. We're seeing new terms, new roles created every year, new skills, new combinations of skills, and they're all used in different ways. There's new niche specializations, and sometimes there's entire skill sets that we haven't mastered. And as a hot area, there's people joining this data industry through many varied pathways, like my own, that aren't the traditional route or don't have a degree or a certification in the industry directly. If you're feeling it or have felt the bite recently, just remember there is no one waiting in the wings to catch you out. Companies hire people for what they can do and what they do know. Um, when I was having a particular hard time a few years ago, I was trying to figure out how we were going to expand out customer and partner training. At the same time, we were trying to handle support training while being really new to the whole concept of technical training as a thing in the first place. And a friend and mentor in work gave me this book. It was called The First 100 Days, and it was really more of an exec level coaching book designed to take like an exec through their first like quarter at a company and have them making an impact quickly. But there was this section of it at the very, very start that was designed to get you thinking clearly about what your strengths really are and around defining your weaknesses fairly. And it suddenly put everything into perspective for me. So it's a really great framework. And if you allow me a couple of minutes to take you through it, I'll just take you through the basics, and it might help you the way it's helped me over the years. It's helped a few of my colleagues too that I've taken through it. So I do have the book linked at the end of the slides, but if you do want to look it up, it's by Niamh O'Keefe. She's a Cork woman as well. It goes into a lot more depth than this, but one of her key concepts that worked for me was this. You need to identify your perceived weaknesses and mitigate them. It's perceived because sometimes when you write them down in the cold light of day, they actually seem silly, or they won't really need mitigation at all, but write it down anyway and get them out of your mind. And then you identify and build on your strengths. The whole profiling piece here, it takes you through profiling yourself, the role, and the wider organization that it fits into. And the idea being, by the end of it, you're comfortable in how you fit in with the org and what success means to you and what it means to the people around you. Doing this properly takes about 2 hours, so this is the real quick version of it. But feel free to take screenshots or whatever as we go through this if you think it might be useful to you. From this, if you know what success looks like, you can kind of tell if you're achieving it already or not. And even if not, you have defined out a path to get there. And either of those two ways can help, I've found. So the first part of this is just sitting down and profiling yourself. For this section, you have to be as extensive in your answers as you can be. It's more important to think through your previous roles in different companies. You find that you pick up all sorts of skills along the way and you wind up using them without realizing it. And then form part of your strengths. When I was profiling this for the training role, for example, I didn't know a whole lot about script writing, demos, writing lab guides. But what I did have was years of experience with talking to customers directly in support. And I knew the kind of questions that they had, the kind of topics they'd find interesting. And I was really well practiced at writing steps on how to fix something, which when it came down to it, didn't turn out to be that much different to writing lab guides in the end. So by writing that down, it helped me figure out where my strengths were and how I could use those. The big one here as well to do is your worries. You write them down, regardless as to whether it's founded or unfounded, and you mark them that way. So, because there's a relief to writing it down and then marking it as silly if that's what it is. For me, so the other thing is, well, look, if it's a legit worry, mark that down too. We'll put a little bit more thought into it. Like what is the kind of risk that's causing that worry? Is it something that you need to mitigate? Is it something that you can mitigate? And if you can, write down a couple of different options for how you do that. It's a way of kind of force thinking through it that will help. So for me, when I was doing this, for the training role particularly, I knew I was new to leading a team of experienced technical trainers. I didn't know enough about adult learning to know if we were developing good content, and identified this as being one of my biggest worries. So from writing it down, I said, okay, so I took a FETAC course and it helped to mitigate that risk, but it also gave me this whole new level of appreciation of the work that goes into developing that type of content. When you're new to a role, you want to be honest about what you need for that role, not necessarily the same thing as what you want to learn from that role. They may be two completely different levels. So that will also help to define, okay, well, this is the level that I need to be at to do this role successfully. This is the level I want to be at in 2 to 5 years. It's a totally different thing. You also want to profile your colleagues a little bit here and your perception of them. You will find that some of your colleagues will have skill sets that you would just love to know more about. And honestly, people are just happy to teach what they know. So you look back then at the profiling you section to this. And then from that, you may even find that you have skills that you can also help your team with and teach them back to. As an example on this one, when I moved to the quality of service team, I knew I'd have a huge amount to learn from that team on how to maintain calibration across the auditors, particularly as the team was scaling up. From me, they gained a lot of insights into why certain support processes exist and why cases might be handled in one way versus another. So we learned an awful lot from each other because of that, because we'd been open about what it is, what areas we didn't know. For that particular role, I think I felt imposter syndrome a lot less frequently because I'd actually used this framework early on, and I'd figured out that basically my role wasn't to do the auditing itself. I didn't know how to do the auditing itself, but that wasn't a worry anymore. Um, my role was to figure out beyond auditing where the support quality was really suffering. And funnily enough, that's exactly how I wound up starting on this data journey to begin with. Um, if you're not new to the role, and it's a role that you've been in for a while, pretty much the same idea. Um, but there's two key question changes. So what you want to do here is you want to look at your past work in this current role, and what work do you consider was your best success? What was it that made it really well received? What could you build further on that made it so successful? So maybe it was a case that it was communicated out really well. Maybe it was the timing aspect, it lined up with other priorities that were happening at the time. Or maybe it was how you managed to pitch it and match it to audience expectations. Whatever it was that helped to make that success clearer, see if there's a way to build on that. And then that will help you to repeat it, and it will help to build that confidence as well. The next part is where you profile the org. Gets a little interesting here because this isn't defining how your role fits into the org. It's actually more about how you in this role fit into the org, and how you need to speak with your stakeholders, for example. Sometimes with this one actually, after defining who your stakeholders are, it's worth setting up a meeting with them and asking their expectations. It might not always be possible. For the quality team, for example, we had defined our primary stakeholder as being our end customers. So we couldn't call them directly to find out if it was helping or not, but we were able to use customer satisfaction surveys as our measure as well to gauge if what we were doing was going the right way or not. The other side of this is that imposter syndrome can be based on setting unrealistic expectations for yourself. So if you can get clear expectations from stakeholders, that can really help. Also, if it's a case that there's a mismatch there and that their expectations are the ones that are unrealistic, having that conversation gives you the chance to reset their expectations if you need to. Basically, it comes down to communication is key. If this is kind of going around and around in your head, and I've experienced this, sometimes just sitting down and having that chat is exactly what you need to put all of that to bed. The challenges piece here actually can help as well, because sometimes you might be able to identify a way that you could assist with some of the current challenges that are going on in your org. Maybe if it hasn't, even if it hasn't been considered yet, if you, with imposter syndrome, maybe you have the feeling out there that everyone else must have already thought about this and seen what's possible and then decided not to do it, but that's not necessarily true. Might be just a case that you're the only one who has spotted it. So putting up your hand and saying, hey, there's a thing, I've spotted it, and rolling with it can be a really good success story. So after profiling yourself, the role, and the org, you basically go around again, because by reviewing each one all over again, you go back over your notes on the previous two. By doing that, you will find that there's some stuff that you can add to each section now that you've thought through all of those other sections. So for example, you might find that some of the risks that you outlined for yourself are already mitigated by other team members' strengths. You might find that you've got a better understanding as well of how your strengths now play into the org, and that maybe you have additional strengths that you haven't thought about now that you've thought about the challenges that the team or the org is facing. So there's a whole book on what the next steps are, but for our purpose, just to know what success looks like to you and who your stakeholders are, and most importantly, what their expectations are, is kind of the big takeaway from this one. If you can meet your stakeholders and get honest feedback regularly from them, it helps a lot. If they're already happy with the work that you're doing, that feedback should help to cement your confidence. And look, if they're not, then it's better to know early and then know what needs to be changed. That also separately helps, just in a different way. So I'm going to leave you with a couple of final tips that I gathered while I was researching the topic that honestly I kind of wish I'd learned about a bit earlier. These are coming from different people in the data community who've also felt the same thing and have produced blogs or produced videos on how they were dealing with this too. One of the suggestions was to keep a wins list. So remind yourself about what you've already accomplished. Defining your success goals. This one doesn't actually mean do your own thing at work at all. Not suggesting that. What it does mean is that success might mean something completely different to you. Maybe success to you is finishing up on time every day to devote time to family or a hobby. Maybe that's your chosen success goal. And if you're setting an unrealistic expectation of getting everything perfect at work, that's going to take more hours than you have in the day, then something's going to give. So it might be a case of needing to reset expectations as to what your real success goal is and match that alongside, and maybe that might help to temper it down. Speaking openly with colleagues also helps. Setting up peer review sessions, for example. It's daunting, but you do get the best assurances from people who know your work and who knows what's involved in it. A stakeholder will only see the final product. They may not know all of the depth of the work that goes in underneath. And finally, be kind to yourself, because one thing that I've learned from this is that we're all our own worst critics. So that one was probably the biggest learning that I needed to take from this. That is it from me. But does anybody have any questions? Stop the screen. Oh, and actually, before I go on, there's one more slide. So I'll send this out. But if anyone is feeling this, there's a brilliant video by Damsel in Data. She's absolutely fantastic, and it's well worth a watch. It's only about 10 minutes, but she's very, very good. So
excellent. Thank you for that, Caroline. That's great. And that's perfect. I was going to ask about links to resources. You mentioned Nebo Keefe in that, so that this is perfect. I can include that in the in a follow-up mail after the call.
Perfect.
Cool. Let me just check. Okay, I don't have anything in the Q&A. I had one question, Caroline. You mentioned around earlier on, you mentioned like profiling yourself, kind of the assessment. Would you, I was just curious, would you, is that something that you're kind of doing in your own head, like you yourself, or like would you have kind of reached out externally on that? I was just curious, what was your thinking on that?
It's both. So initially when I'm doing this, you basically just kind of sit down and write it through yourself. Sometimes it's a case that you kind of get, you kind of iterate on it from talking to other people. Maybe you build a little bit more into it. Maybe you kind of think that there are strengths that you wouldn't have assumed that you have yourself, but by talking to other people, maybe you're like, oh, actually, I'll update my profile and kind of do that. So I have, like for each of the roles that I've done, I've had this kind of living profile of who I am, who the org is, how I fit into that org. And it's kind of helped to, when the imposter syndrome bites, just go back to that and kind of go, it's okay, I've got this, here's the thing, we're doing okay, we've got this, we're at least on track for what we need to be doing. And it just becomes this kind of like a resource that you can go back to kind of say, right, this is what I have. Most of the time when you're going through this at the start, it is a very private thing that you're going through and profiling yourself, profiling your perception of the org, your perception of the role, but you can absolutely update it based on feedback.
Yeah, okay. Well, that was interesting. Well, that was kind of one thing that kind of came into my head was, is it yourself? Do you reach out or, yeah, no, thanks for that. Great stuff. Oh, so we have a question here. I'll just read it briefly. Okay, so how do you deal with someone who undermines you or doesn't trust you despite it being your role to provide the data?
That's a fun one.
Yeah, any thoughts?
I tend to be a little sassy, so if someone tries to undermine the data, I just bring more data.
All right.
Yeah, there is absolutely that. I think we're quite lucky in SolarWinds. We have a very strong culture of data. And we have what we would describe as like curated sources that are the source of truth that across the company. So if you're bringing data from these sources, then it's undisputable. So, don't. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, if someone is coming back to me with a question and kind of saying, I don't think this is correct, I'll go back and revalidate just to be sure. So yeah, there's always kind of that element, but it's give and take. So
yeah, okay.
it depends as well. If it's one of your primary stakeholders, then that definitely comes with an element of, oh God, what have I done?
Yeah.
But there's no getting away from that one, I don't think.
Right, okay. So more data,
Mm.
perhaps, digging up more data. Okay. Yeah. Excellent. Okay. I'll just check. Okay. Okay, well, look, thank you, Caroline. That's awesome. It's just about noon, so maybe we'll, why don't we toggle over to Ewelina, just in the interest of time, and then we can certainly take on some more questions towards the end as well. So thank you again, Caroline. That's really good stuff. And actually all those resources, I know you had mentioned to me about the Niamh O'Keefe book, and thinking about all these different aspects. I think thinking about what challenges that your stakeholders are facing, that's a big one too, that can kind of help you sort of think about what to be doing or focusing on in your own role. So that's great.
Yeah,
thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, everyone.
Great. So I'll leave it over to you, Ewelina.
Thank you. You can hear me okay, right?
Perfect.
And muted everything. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks. Here we go. One of the most popular TED Talks of all time is that of Amy Cuddy. So Amy Cuddy in 2012 gave a talk called Your Body Language Can Change Who You Are. She's a social psychologist, and in her talk, she states that standing in a power pose just for 2 minutes a day, something like this, if you can see me, can change your confidence levels in the long run. Her talk is now unofficially known under the title, Fake It Till You Make It. So hi again, everyone. I'm Ewelina, as Katie mentioned, and I'm an independent data designer working from Paris. Today, building on Caroline's talk, I'm going to be talking to you about 3 tips that could help you to always keep evolving in your career. So we'll look at it through the lens of my experience. We'll illustrate it with Amy's story from the TED Talk, and we'll also use a model that you've probably seen in the past, at least from far away. So this is the 4Ds or 5D, sometimes it can also be 6, these model that designers use to structure their flow. And today we're not going to be designing a data visualization or some product, but we will be using it to design new iterations and new tweaks to your career instead. So I hope you're ready. Let's begin exploring. For as long as I can remember, I've sort of been a nerd. So in high school, if I had to learn one date or one history event, I would read 3 books about it, just to be sure. When I was barely 18 and I had to choose what to study, my top 3 choices were completely unrelated. So I had economics, history, and languages. And the reason I had all of these sort of together is because I've always loved exploring different fields and seeing how they interact and also how they feed off of each other. So I ended up studying economics and later finance, and I'll skip the details. So fast forward quite a few years later, I got my first sort of serious job after my master's, and I was working as a financial analyst at Warner Brothers. So my job was mainly analyzing financial data in Excel. So sometimes it would be quite fun, complex formulas that would get my brain going. But to be very honest, most of the time it was sort of copy pasting and making up numbers for forecasts, not to reveal too many secrets. So I was excited about the job for a few years, and then quite quickly I got bored because I wasn't learning. So I started looking for other areas where I could develop my skills and learn new things and broaden the horizons, as we say. So I sort of went back to my passion for public speaking. So Toastmasters, TEDx, World Speech Day, lots of names that you probably have never heard of. Then I started volunteering a lot. And at some point, my schedule looked something like this, and that's on top of a full-time job. And I was scattered all over the place just because there was no one activity, let alone my day job, that could tick all of the boxes. So I needed something to nourish the analytical side of me, to help develop the communicator in me, and also work with the person who wants to do the side of me who wants to make the world just a tiny bit better. So after doing this for a couple of years, I was exhausted because it was definitely way too much. And I just wanted to have a more meaningful day job. And that's when a friend of mine suggested I should check out data, because it was just this whole field, because it was sort of a natural transition from my finance role. And I loved it from the start, because as soon as I wrote the first 2 lines of Python code, my brain was just literally jumping up and down because it was learning and being excited. So that's where I also discovered that data visualization was an actual field, and there was research in visual perception, and that I could study it. So slowly I focused on that, and the amount of activities I was doing, thankfully, narrowed down with time as well. So the reason I'm a data designer today, as I presented myself, is mainly because I discovered I liked it when I was exploring many, many things at the same time. So remember Amy from that TED Talk? She also went on a similar path. So she studied prejudice, and then at the time of her talk, she was working for a business school, and inevitably all of these areas mixing together brought her to study or to analyze power dynamics. And that's how she got into doing experiments about body language and your perception of herself. And this brought her to a new career path that eventually landed her a talk on the famous TED stage that afterwards changed the course of her career. So do I recommend going about it the way I did? Definitely, absolutely not. As you saw on the previous screen, I was doing way too much a normal human being should be doing. But I do suggest you learn at least 1 or 2 things at once, always, if you can. Just take it easier, which is what I've done since. So you'll see how all of those different areas later come together, but you need to discover them at first. So my question to you today is, what are you going to learn next? And in order to commit to it, I suggest you block an hour or 2 on your calendar each week so that it actually happens, because we know how calendars go, and then commit to it and track what you actually like so that you can extract those little bits and add them to your career later on. So since we're quite a small group today, I think it would be nice if you all started sharing the next thing you were going to learn, or maybe one that you're learning now, while we keep going with the talk. So do let us know what you're going to learn next.
Yeah, throw it into the chat there.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. So once you discover something you like and you want to integrate it in your career in some shape or form, how do you go about that? When I realized that data visualization was a thing that I really enjoyed and wanted to do more of, I was still a very long way from actually being any good at it. And I'm not really sure I still am, because as I keep learning. But despite that, I immediately announced to the world that I was a data viz person. So I spoke about data visualization to pretty much anyone who would listen. I befriended fellow data viz designers and changed my title on CV, LinkedIn, social media, all that. I spoke about data viz so much that today my friends who are not data viz people, they keep sending me all of the images that they see on the internet saying, oh, this is such a cool viz. And most of the time it's not even a viz at all, but it's just, they just have this idea ingrained that I'm a data viz person. So I spelled out who I wanted to be before I actually believed that I was it. And it actually worked out pretty great. So my second advice to you is to claim your spot, because the fact that you're learning doesn't mean that you're starting from scratch and that you don't have valuable skills to offer. Now is probably a good time to come back to the elephant in many rooms that Caroline expanded quite a lot on, which is the good old imposter syndrome. And I know many of us suffer from it, including myself, and you may have been thinking about it while I was saying, just go ahead and claim your spot under the sun. So this is where Amy's experience from that TED Talk is actually very interesting and comes in handy and inspirational. So in the talk, she shares that when she was 19, she got into a terrible car accident, thrown out of a car, rolling over a few times, which resulted into brain damage in the sense that her cognitive capacities were diminished. So when she woke up from the injuries, she was told that she could never finish college and that she would just do something else with her life. And she didn't want to accept it. So she worked really, really hard. And it took her 4 years longer than her peers, but she ended up graduating from college and even going to sort of famous universities and places for her grad studies, which were Princeton and Harvard, if I remember correctly. But throughout the whole experience, Amy had this little voice in her head that said, you don't belong here. You're not good enough. I'm sure this may sound familiar to at least some of you. I know it does to me. So the way she got over it was just by doing the work again and again, just sticking to it for as long as she needed, until one day, after faking it for so long, she felt like she made it, that she became it. And apparently that happened. So it's nice to hear that one day you can actually feel like you've made it. So you can actually do the same. So when you find something that you want to do, so be it an entirely new job or just a certificate that maybe you want to add to your belt to make your career a bit more interesting, just claim it. Say that you're the Tableau expert in healthcare. Maybe you're the Alteryx guru in Dublin, or the database person for hospital managers. Whatever it is, after you discover it and define it, just own it. Change your title on LinkedIn and then keep working at it. So the key being keep working at it, because this is what will help you to move forward. So today, whenever I feel my imposter syndrome creeping up again, I just go and make as many visualizations as I can to sort of silence it and shut it down. So I see that there's some activity in the chat. I'm looking forward to reading it after I'm done. So do let us know also, on top of what you're learning, what are you going to claim? Is there a title or a little certificate or a class that you've done and you've never added it just because you felt like you didn't have enough experience or enough skills? Do let us know what you're going to claim. What's your spot under the sun? While we move to the third part. So now that you've discovered it and defined it, everyone knows, you keep working at it. What do we do in this develop step? In this develop step, I want to talk about networks. Since you're all in this meetup, I assume you've already realized that it's nice to have a network and participate in gatherings with like-minded people. So for you, they may be your Tableau peers, or maybe the community from the Data Visualization Society in general, people on Twitter, etc. And I myself am part of these. And as some of you may know, I run the Outlier Conference and have a meetup here in Paris. And I really love all of those. But what I want to encourage you to do today is to go a step further. So I'm going to call it your tribe. So do develop your tribe. So what you see on the screen is my tribe. We're a group of 5 data visualization enthusiasts here in Paris. And what unites us is the love for all things data viz. So my fellow tribe members, the 4 ladies, they're one of those few people who don't mind talking weird data viz stuff every day. And often it's a few times a day. And we share inspiration, we share questions, we attend data events together. We get into the nitty-gritty of what happens when you click on this thing in Illustrator, which literally no one on the planet is interested in hearing about. And we also share things like issues with clients, how to deal with them. And we inspire and encourage each other in everything we do. So it's been a great source of inspiration and strength for me. It's been amazing to just have these incredible ladies a WhatsApp message away. So remember when I said that Amy from that TED Talk, so Amy Cuddy, faked it till she became it? What I left out up until now is that she didn't do it herself. And Caroline also mentioned the mentors at the end of her talk in this suggestion. So this message is kind of the same. She didn't have the idea of just doing the work and sticking to it by herself. It was a mentor of hers that encouraged her, even pushed her to do it. And then when she actually made it, when she felt comfortable with what she was doing, when she was already teaching, she encouraged a student of hers to do the same, a student who felt a little bit out of place. So do create your own tribe, whatever your field is, if it's Tableau, data viz, or data engineering. I'm sure there are like-minded people, and you can start today. You can just message someone you've heard about and never met and grab a coffee wherever you are in Ireland, or you can create a Slack channel on the Data Viz Society's Slack workspace, or just send a WhatsApp message and start creating this tribe that will be your support and help you keep iterating in your career. So discover, define, develop, and then we get to the deliver stage, which is the end of the cycle when everything comes full circle. In this talk, I see it as a stage where you don't necessarily have to do anything anymore, but things fall together. It's when all of these fields that you explore, the people you met, and the titles you claim sort of come together. To me, it was last year when I finally decided to go freelance in the data design field, and especially when I started working with Data for Change, that I hope you've heard of as an organization. And I was, and still am, very excited about it, because all of these fields that I spoke about earlier, they all interested me, and I wanted to see how they feed off of each other. And now I actually use all of them in my work, which is super, super exciting. So this is sort of the end in a good way of the data viz cycle for me. And now I get to keep learning and enjoying it. So just like in Amy's talk, when she speaks about body language and power posing to boost your confidence levels, all of what I've mentioned, and I think even what Caroline mentioned, is mainly about how you speak to yourself and how you perceive yourself, and how will you then project that to the wider community. So this is the message I want to leave you with, and I sort of made a bit of a cheat sheet for you that you can screenshot, or I think I can also probably send this to Katie, and she can share after the talk over emails, with 3 steps that at the end come full circle for you to keep evolving in your career. And to wrap up, since you've been so nice and kind and joined us for a talk during your lunch break, I've reserved a little personal announcement for you that I literally have told no one else about, except my boyfriend, who has his destiny is to just listen to all of my ideas, unfortunately, but I haven't announced it on social media or anywhere. So as you can see on the screen, I'm launching a newsletter, and the first one will come out next week. So if you enjoyed the way I think, I will be writing about data design and storytelling, and maybe also a few tips on how to deliver all of your data talks. So do check it out if you're interested. But in the meantime, discover, define, and develop all of those new cool iterations in your career. Over to you, Katie, I think.
Thank you, Ewelina. That's great. Sorry, I was just having a button difficulty there. Thank you very much, Ewelina. That was great. Yeah, we have some, you mentioned about what people are learning in the chat box. So I thought I'd bring that up. We had, let me pull it up there. I'm going to scroll back up. We have Leah is learning to do SQL and Tableau simultaneously. She mentioned about the struggling to keep up a bit because, you know, maybe what you're learning isn't necessarily part of your current role, so you end up learning it after work. Any thoughts on that? Because that is huge. I feel that, and yeah, I know I'm not alone. And Leah's, you know,
for sure. I did the same. So when I really got deep into database, I kind of, when I say I got lucky in a sense, wasn't a lucky period, but it was the COVID period. So there was nothing to do anyway. So all I did was make visualizations and watch classes and read books on it. It's definitely harder to do when you have like an actual job and when I see people, and especially if you have kids, then it's a whole different story. That's why in the first part of my talk, I suggested that you just block an hour on your calendar so that everyone can see it. And I'm sure most employers are not going to hate you for it, or if they do, just call it something else, pretend you have a call with someone, but just have it there. That way you show up, then you have a reminder, and you don't have the excuse of, I need to do this thing because it's so urgent. Your learning is also urgent in a way and will only make you better at your job. So do try and commit to it. It doesn't have to be five days a week, but just a little bit here and there, and then you can commit to some sort of maybe online class or just practice or one of those challenges that there are in the community, and then say, okay, so every Monday I do this thing of data prep or SQL or something.
Yeah, no, that's great advice, Ewelina. Yeah, because I think that that's a common challenge is where do you fit that in?
Yeah.
So yeah, it probably makes sense to just block the time out and commit to it, stick to it.
I usually pay for that with less social life, but that's just...
Well, yeah, there's that, but small price. And maybe perhaps, I don't know, I'm only just thinking out loud, like maybe after you do it for a while, it becomes habit.
Yeah, definitely.
Maybe, you know, maybe
my boyfriend and I are both like, he's a hardcore learner and he works in online education and stuff. So we're both kind of like that. So it definitely does help. Right. So I think it brings us back to this idea of finding like-minded people, so that they also like keep pushing you and you keep pushing them and you get inspired and you're like, oh, I saw this class, it looks amazing, you should do it, I think you'd like it, and then you just keep it going.
That's true. That's very true. When you've got your tribe, your network.
Yeah.
I felt that with Lee as well. I had the exact same feeling when I was working in quality. And again, it was only about 25% of my role was data. So in order to learn it, I used to just pick up like personal challenges with it to kind of go, okay, well, this time around, okay, I have to dive into this with the data, but I'm going to produce a dashboard and I'm going to learn parameter actions with this one to see what that looks like. So sometimes you can work it in with the job too. It helps. But yeah, an awful lot of it is just after work.
There are some companies that I hear of that say every employee has the half a day a week to learn and experiment with new stuff. So maybe if you're like really eager to, maybe you wanted to find one of those and just go for it. I'm a freelancer, so it's a bit different for me. But in the company, you either have to convince your bosses or just find one that already understood it, and then you don't have to explain that learning is a thing.
Yeah. And you know what, too, if you don't ask, you'll never know. So maybe it's something you can ask, you know, can I take out X piece of my day or my week or my month or whatever to dedicate to learning? That could be an idea.
Yeah. And if you do that, it's probably helpful to just, you know, give the time slot and say, here are the benefits that they're gonna bring to my work. When I was at Warner Brothers, now a bit of a while ago, and I started learning data, so I was in the financial department, and I mentioned that people were just doing copy pasting, and I was learning Python on my own time, but they did eventually let me work with the data team, which in a big company it was like a huge deal, because they were like, this is not in her job description, what is she doing? We're a bit lost. But once they let me do it, I with the help of the data team, we automized some of the workflows for the finance team so that they stopped doing copy pasting, and they were like, oh, okay, so this is actually very helpful. And then they're like, okay, so keep learning, do your thing. So maybe if you're able to just say, okay, this will teach me this, and then the team will gain 8 hours a week just because if you parameter action or something.
Maybe not monetize, but if you can quantify it.
Yeah.
that could be an idea. Yeah. What else came up? We have Colin. I believe her name is Ellen. She is learning Alteryx and Linux at the moment. Two big pieces there. Alteryx, Linux, and then, oh, Caroline, you said Tableau CRM and more Tableau Prep. That's good.
Okay, so it's not called Einstein anymore?
No, it's not. They changed it. It's now Tableau CRM, but yeah.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah, there's a lot in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is. Yeah. You can, I'll catch up with you after you learn it all. You can tell.
You can teach
school
us.
me.
We'll do a
I don't
workshop.
feel right now like I'm ever going to get there. Here we go, imposter syndrome again.
Ah, there we go. That's okay. That's all right. Oh yeah, and then Leah was mentioning, taking up the Back to Viz Basics challenge to push me. Oh, but I'm 2 challenges behind already. I wouldn't worry about that. You'll catch up. You'll catch up, Leah.
That's actually really nice about the data community, that you can find a challenge on anything, and then also saves you time, because most often not always, but often they give you data sets, and if you can find data sets, just go to Makeover Monday, like past 5 years, and there will be a lot of those. There will be 1 a week, and you can just grab whichever and practice.
Yeah, grabbing something to practice with. Yeah, definitely. I find some of the challenges that require you to get your own data.
It's hard. The
It can be hard.
30-day chart
The
challenge.
30-day chart challenge. Yeah.
It's
yeah,
one per
that's
day.
a big
So.
one. Yeah, it's 1 a day. That's a big one. I thought about that, and then I kind of had to say maybe not, because not right now at the minute anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's a good point, Ewelina. Yeah, a lot of these challenges, they do provide the data. It's a good way to practice. If you're talking about data visualization or even a data prep, practicing, you could probably even find some of that, Leah, for practicing your SQL chops. There's probably data out there you could be practicing with.
Yeah, and I think what is it? Was it called? It's data.world or something. The platform that Makeover Monday ended up using for their to store the data sets. I think it has an interface for SQL that you can practice in.
I didn't know that, actually.
I think so.
Nice. I'll check that out myself. Yeah. So let's check Q&A chat. Yeah. Okay. Oh, but look, thank you, Ewelina. That was great. That was really good. Any other questions from anybody? Please chat it in. Otherwise, I'd take you off mute, because we do have a small group, but I'm not able to take you off mute. Otherwise, I would.
I can't see anyone.
Yeah, and we can't see anybody either. So you just never know sometimes. If it's a big group, you can't do that, but with a small group, you kind of can. So next time. But so look, I'm going to say thank you one last time, and I'm going to stop the recording. So thanks everybody for joining, and we'll see you at the next time. Thanks.